In this lesson, we will discuss very high frequency, VHF, high frequency, HF, selective calling, cell call, and the radio management panels, RMPs. The aircraft has three identical VHF communication systems. VHF-3 is normally used for ACARS, but it may be used for voice communications as a backup. In the emergency electrical configuration, only VHF number 1 functions, frequency range 118.0 to 136.975 MHz. Each system has its own transceiver in the avionics bay and a separate antenna on the fuselage. The aircraft may be equipped with one or two identical HF radio systems used for long-distance voice transmissions. Each system has a separate transceiver in the avionics compartment, and if two systems are installed, a common tuner and a common antenna in the vertical stabilizer. The frequency range for the HF radios is 2.8 to 24.0 MHz. HF1 is also used for data communications. When HF1 is used in data mode, digital information is transmitted between HF1 and ATSU. HF radio transmission is inhibited on the ground. A ground HF data link push button, located on the overhead panel, can be used to override the inhibition. Note that HF radios must not be used during refueling or defueling operations. The cell call system will advise the crew both orally and visually when a ground station is calling the aircraft. A buzzer sounds, and the appropriate radio call button illuminates in amber, indicating which VHF or HF radio is receiving the call. The call light can be canceled by pressing the reset key on the ACP. The oral cell call warning is inhibited during takeoff and landing. The RMPs allow the crew to control all of the VHF and HF radio communication equipment. Each RMP can control any VHF or HF radio. They can also be used as a backup to the Flight Management Guidance Computers, FMGCs, for controlling radio navigation systems. RMPs 1 and 2 are located on the center pedestal, and the third is located on the overhead panel. Each RMP can control any VHF or HF transceiver. RMP1 and RMP2 are connected directly to all VHF and HF transceivers. RMP3 is connected via RMP1 and RMP2. RMPs are connected together so that each RMP is updated to the selections made on the other RMPs. Only RMP1 functions in emergency electrical configuration. The on-off switch controls electrical power to the RMP panel. The frequency selector knobs are used to select the radio frequency. The outer knob controls whole numbers, and the inner knob controls the decimal numbers. When a new frequency is selected, it is displayed in the standby window. Pressing the transfer key transfers the standby frequency to the active window, and the active frequency back to the standby window. Select the frequency selector knob to select a new frequency, then the transfer key to transfer the new frequency to the active window.
Please try again.
Pressing one of the Radiocom selection keys on an RMP gives that RMP control of the selected radio and illuminates the green monitor light. Normally, RMP1 controls VHF1 and HF1, and RMP2 controls VHF2 and HF2. If a transceiver normally associated with one RMP is selected by another, the white selector light illuminates on both RMPs. For example, when the VHF number 2 Radiocom selector key is pressed on RMP number 1, the number 2 transceiver will now also be tuned by RMP number 1. Both RMP number 1 and RMP number 2 will display the same tuned frequency, and the white selector light illuminates on both. Reselecting the VHF number 1 Radiocom selection key on RMP number 1 will return control of VHF number 1 to RMP number 1, and the white selector lights go out. For aircraft with HF radios installed and selected, this push-button switch allows the selection of AM mode. When the push button is pressed, the indicator light is displayed, and the AM mode is now active. When the indicator light is out, the radio is in the default single-sideband SSB mode. Lifting the transparent guard and pressing the radio navigation backup mode key allows the pilot to tune navigation receivers and courses through the radio navigation selection keys. Normal communication radio selections and frequencies are unaffected. Backup navigation mode is covered in detail in the navigation module. The load function key on the RMP is used to load a VHF frequency sent by Air Traffic Control, ATC, via a Controller Pilot Data Link Communications, CPDLC data link message to the flight crew. A white light above the load key comes on to indicate that the sent frequency is available to be loaded. To load this VHF frequency to the standby course window, press the load key before closing the contact monitor message. When a frequency from the ATC services has been received, the ATSU validates the frequency and simultaneously sends the information to all the RMPs in order to activate the load function. When the load function is activated, the flight crew can repeatedly load the frequency on each RMP as often as necessary, unless data is selected in the standby window. Note, a deactivate label is visible above the key if the load function is not installed. For the VHF radios, if a microphone has been transmitting for more than 30 seconds, an interrupted tone sounds for 5 seconds, and the microphone transmission is turned off. To reactivate the transmission, the crew member releases the Press to Talk button and presses it again. In this lesson, we have discussed very high frequency, VHF, high frequency, HF, selective calling, cell call, and the radio management panels, RMPs.